Tyler's first ever live stream. So am I coming across? Hi, everybody. This is Bess. I am one of the gardeners at Tyler Arboretum, and welcome to Tyler's first ever live stream. So I'm going to ask you to be just a little bit patient with us as we figure all of this out, but hopefully I'm coming through nice and clear. So the reason we decided to do this is I think we're all finding ourselves at home maybe a little bit more out in our own backyards. I know we all miss the Arboretum. I wish I could be there today with you guys. But we're thinking, gardening is such a good form of stress reduction. It's how I get rid of all of my stress. So you might be finding yourself looking for ways to get out of the house safely, and you might be considering your own garden. To come to you live from my own backyard to share just some ideas and resources that I have, and to hopefully answer a few of your questions. Feel free throughout this event to type questions into the comments bar, and I'll do my best to answer as many of them as I can. And if I don't get to your question, definitely send an email to Julia at jlo@tylerarboretum.org, and I will follow up with you after this event. So, but before I get to your questions, I want to just quickly talk about what gardening in the spring right now looks like. So I've just gone through my garden and I did a big cutback of all my perennials and a rake up of all of last year's leaves. Now those things are traditionally done in the fall, or at least they have been, but I like to save it for the spring because I like to leave all of that material up in the garden for the birds and the bees and the butterflies to take shelter in during the winter. I really rely on those old piles of leaves and the old stalks of dried perennials to get them through the cold season. I know it's time to cut them back when I take a look at my garden bed and I can see this year's growth starting to push. Once I see that, I know the beds, and then I start this year's compost with those old perennials. Because they've already sort of started to break down, it's a really great starter for your compost pile. Once I've accomplished all of that, I like to go through and do a really thorough weeding because the weeds are already here. They have been here for a month at least. So the things that you're probably going to see in your yard are the same things that I'm seeing in mine around out at Tyler Arboretum. Things like hairy bittercress, garlic mustard's a big one this time of year, dandelions. If you're not sure what they look like, you might want to take a look at. Fun side note, all of the weeds I just named are totally edible, so you could eat them if you were so inspired. But they do tend to have a pretty strong flavor. So once I've done my weeding, then is time to think about planting. And that might be a little bit tricky this particular spring season with our garden centers closed. But there are places you can order seeds from online. Burpee's a great one for vegetable seeds. You could absolutely be starting your lettuce and your chard and your kale this time of year would do really well. And you can also order live plants online, or hopefully all of our garden centers will be back up and open, ready for business by Mother's Day, which is really when you'd want to be thinking about putting out your annual plants. So once I've got everything planted, then I like to go through, and I'm a big believer in mulch. Sort of not a contentious issue, but people have a number of different opinions about mulch, but I'm a fan of it because I think it lets you get ahead of the weeds in your garden, and I think it lets you kind of get into the soil chemistry a little bit in a way that I think is really valuable and really interesting. Your soil is the foundation of your garden, and unless you sort of know what's going on down there, it's a really good resource to have a sense of what your soil is doing. And once you've done all of that, give your lawn its first haircut of the year and get ready to enjoy a really nice season. Those are my steps in my garden. I like to manage my garden organically. I don't want to put down any chemical, not that they're critters that need our backyards because we're so curtailing their habitat. So I don't tend to use chemicals. So the aim of my game is to make sure that I'm providing them with good, safe habitat, something to eat, and
I disconnected.
Oh.
Also, Julia asked if she can plant a tomato plant.
Mother's Day. Let me know when I'm back again.
Back on the Wi-Fi. Back.
I'm back?
I don't know. I'm asking. Ask for back.
Hi, everybody. We had a little skip there. Am I back live again? Fantastic. I did get one question while we were skipped out, which is, can I plant my tomatoes yet? Mother's Day is the day when you can plant out any of our annual plants that don't, your kale, your Swiss chard, all of them are going to do really well, spinach, but you're going to want to wait on your things like your summer squash, or if any gets a wait some of the great questions I've gotten. So my very first question comes from Barbara. Hi, Barbara. She was wondering how to keep guara alive in the garden. And guara is a beautiful plant. It has a very light, airy feel with pink flowers. But I have to admit, I don't find it to be reliably hardy. So we actually have some planted in the barn garden at Tyler Arboretum right now, and I know plenty of people who've had great success growing it. My best recommendation is to have it in a sunny spot and to really make sure your soil is well drained. They do not like to sit in heavy clay, wet soil. So I think that would be the first thing to take a look at is what your soil is doing. So that's my response there, but feel free to follow up if you have more questions about growing guara, because it can be a little bit finicky sometimes. The next question I got are, what are some good tools to have on hand when you're gardening in your own backyard? And I got that from Antonella. Hi, Antonella. So the things that I like to have are a good, sturdy rake. I would be lost without my rake. I also have a little hand saw. The third brand is Silky. I promise they're not sponsoring this. They just make really good saws. I like to have a pair of loppers, but I find that if you don't have that, you can get away with just using a saw and hand pruners. I also really love my weed shrug. This is my friend. It comes with me everywhere. But truly my favorite are my Felco hand pruners. These are number 2s. These are my absolute favorite. They go with me everywhere. They're always right here in my pocket. So that's a good place to get started. And a soil knife. A soil knife, or what's called a hori-hori, is a really good one to have. That's going to let you get down in the soil and do some good weeding. So that's a really good set of tools to start with, but you can certainly add tons of stuff to that list. They make a lot of really beautiful supplies, but that's sort of how I get by in my own garden. And those are the tools I pull most often when I'm working at the Tyler Arboretum. My next question is, I talked a little bit about mulch, and I'll talk a little bit because I think that this is something people are thinking of. I think is great because it does a nice job of holding and germinate in that. But I think it has a nice aesthetic look. I think it does good things for your soil chemistry.
But you got a question about your American chestnut and
Okay, another little skip. I promise we're working on figuring out all of these little hiccups. I did get a question about my American chestnut tree. I do have an American chestnut tree in my backyard. It is the first tree I planted when I moved in. I got it through my internship at Morris, and the American chestnut is my favorite tree. And planting it here in my backyard was one small piece of what I could do to further the restoration project that's being done. And if you have questions about that, I would absolutely do a webinar just about American chestnuts. Another question I got is it the same to work in a raised bed box for vegetable gardening versus into the soil directly? It's not the same. It's fairly similar if you know you have decent soil in your backyard. The benefit of working directly into your yard soil is that you do not have to build a raised bed box, which takes a little bit of labor. The benefit of having raised beds is that you are really controlling what the soil chemistry is. You know what's going on in there. It also tends to warm up a little bit earlier in the season because it's elevated. It's getting more sun directly on the sides of it. It tends to be a little bit more aerated, which is nice for the roots of your vegetable plants. And it can give you a little bit of protection from things like rabbits. I do have raised beds in my backyard, and I built them fairly high. I did a solid 2.5 feet, which is higher than you need to do, but I wanted to get it out of rabbit munching distance. And I have had pretty good success with that. So that's my raised bed question. I was almost finished talking about mulch. My best avoid ones that are dyed, and hardwood mulch doesn't tend, and leaf mulch compost don't tend to be dyed. I'm not a fan of putting dye down on the ground. And to do a soil test, most garden centers, and you might also be able to get them online, offer a soil test kit that you can bring home, fill up with a little soil from Penn State, emails you a really helpful report, in perfect neutral, and that will kind of I got was about lawn care. I think a lot of people right now, I know I mow my lawn. I think a lot of people are kind of getting back in. So just a few quick basics on lawn care. Don't cut your grass super short. If you've cut it to like 1.5 inches or lower, that really stresses the plant. So if you can go a little bit higher, at home here I like to do 2 or 2.5 inches just to give the plant a little bit more above ground life to keep its roots going. It's really nice if you have the time to come out in the beginning that might be suppressing new growth. Once you've done that, if you have access to like a good compost tea, if you can put your compost grass, that's going to give it just a little bit of a feed. I'm applying fertilizer. I prefer to go with something that's going to become a part of this growing grass. Check your compaction, see if it's been worn down or compacted, and if you need to loosen it up a bit, then you can put your new grass seed on top and cover it with some light hay. That'll keep it safe and let it fill in. So that's a good place to start for lawn care. And you can get much more comprehensive than that. And if you have any follow-up questions, please email them in. I'm happy to get a little bit more granular on that. Had pretty good success growing most things in big enough pots on the patio. I love growing tomatoes, and I had a porch when before we owned our house, I had a porch where I grew a lot of tomato plants, a lot of pepper plants. Lettuce does very well. The thing you want to be watching out for is to make sure you have a large enough pot for the thing that you're trying to grow. So if you're trying to grow tomato, you're going to actually specifically grown for patio gardening. So they tend to be a smaller variety. They tend to yield a little bit, maybe a little bit more quickly, but there are absolutely options out there for those of you who want to grow some vegetable plants but don't have a backyard or a raised bed to do it in. The only thing I haven't had much success growing in pots are root vegetables like carrots and beets. I've never been able to get them to grow, which is not to say that you can't. I know people who've grown potatoes successfully, but just that I've always had trouble with it. Any other questions come in?
No more questions right now. We're at 15 minutes.
Okay, we've only got 4 more minutes, so if you guys have any more questions that you'd like me to answer, now is your moment to ask. I did get one more question via email about good low maintenance plants for some high color in the garden. And there are tons of really beautiful options. I'm a big fan of going native, but there's lots of non-native plants that are lovely as well. My big favorites are I like coreopsis a lot. I like garden phlox. I love asters because that really stretches the season for you. But my all-time favorite plant is the queen of the prairie, Filipendula rubra. That's a really tall, gorgeous pink perennial that I think is really underused in the garden.
Do you do in-person lessons at KDF?
I do, actually. So I've taught at Tyler before. I've taught at Morris Arboretum as well. I'm very, very happy to do in-person lessons. but in this era of social distancing, we felt like this would be the best way to come to you to answer your questions.
How long should I leave my daffodil leaves growing for after they are finished blooming?
Fabulous question. Oh, I really like that one because this often gets overlooked. So if you've got bulbs, spring bulbs, leave their foliage until the 4th of July. Seems like a really long time, but at that point, the 4th of July is when you know they've stored enough energy in their bulb to come back next year. Cutting them earlier than that, especially regularly from year to year, runs the risk of starving the plant. So July 4th for your spring bulbs. Anything else? No more. How many more minutes?
One.
One more minute? No more questions to sneak in under the wire?
What kind of wood should you build a raised garden bed out of?
What kind of wood should you build a raised garden bed out of? Okay. So I use cypress wood for my raised bed garden because I know that is it takes a little bit longer for that to break down, and then my posts that are holding it in place and giving it its shape, I use cedar because those are also fairly slow to rot. The only thing you don't want to use is pressurized treated wood because that runs the risk of leaching chemicals out into your soil. So as long as you're following that guideline, you should be in good shape.
How do you feel about braiding bulb leaves and help with a dead red bud?
So I definitely don't recommend cutting anything back to the ground if your red bud is dying. You can always cut out dead branches that are, cut them back to a nice junction to clean it up and to see what it does. And that is really at that point I would recommend taking a look at what's going on. With a picture of your plant, I will take a look at it. My best recommendation at the moment is prune out the dead, consider mulching, and consider giving it a little bit of fertilizer. But I will give a better recommendation when I see a photo. And I think that's it. Thank you guys so much for joining me here today. I definitely would love to get together with you again in the future. And in the meantime, please consider making a donation to Tyler Arboretum. We're raising money right now for our annual fund, and the past few weeks have been pretty hard on us. So if you have a moment and you have the inclination, hop on over to Tyler's website and make a donation. I know it would go a long way. Thank you so much.